All right, folks. Good evening. Thanks for coming to the show. Just going live briefly here with a new acquaintance online. His name is Rascal. He was nice enough to invite me to his Discord server, and we've been having some back and forth commentary. He was kind of curious back. I don't even remember which Darth Dawkins kind of criticizing video I was doing, but he'd reached out and said that he'd be interested in going over his kind of back and forth with Darth. It's something he laid out for him. So I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we're going to get into that topic, I guess, for starters.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Rascal. You can. I have. Well, you know what? I can leave my link to the Discord channel too in the chat if you like. But yeah,
I was going to ask if you wanted to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I have. I've had a few. You know, I sort of stumbled upon Darth Dawkins by like some YouTube videos, like maybe a couple of years ago, or maybe about a year ago. And I was like, this guy is such. What can we curse on your stream? Is that like a issue?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was like, this guy is a real asshole. He just seems like he's more concerned with. He doesn't really seem to like actually support like his the Christian like position. He more like just wants to destroy atheists. So to me, he has like this prejudice against atheists for some reason. He just really despises them. Like you'll hear like every time he like dispatches quote unquote an atheist, he'll go into like with his little Psychophant's crew will go into his little spiel about how all atheists are just deceptive, lying people. So like, this guy is like it just blew me away because I found him to be very deceptive and not straightforward about things he said. Like it's all his stuff seems to be like a trap. He wants to give you lead you down this line of questioning because he's going to trap you in saying some sort of thing that he's going to get to expose and make you sound stupid.
Yeah.
Like it's to me, it's just it's a whole linguistical approach. He's going to use the insufficiencies of language, the impreciseness of language to nail you to some sort of position that you might not even hold. Like he will bully you into giving him an answer or taking a position that he can work with. Like just the one that he generally starts off with is if you're an atheist, he wants he'll ask you, well, you're the type of atheist who says there's no God exists, or are you the type of atheist that says that you just don't believe in any God or you lack belief in gods? And the reason he answers, and it seems like he's trying to actually cater to whatever your specific role is, or the belief is in that case. But he's using that to trap you as well, because he's going to tell you that you can't lack belief in God, and because if you're doing so is somehow internally inconsistent.
Yeah, he goes off on a little bit of one of the newer ones from Tom Rabbit is him talking with Trick again. And then he talks with someone else. But with Trick, he goes into this long... I'm going to listen to it again because he goes into a very long, drawn-out diatribe about...
Sorry, I got a phone call.
Okay, I was going to say, was that Alexa?
Yeah, my phone got wired through her, so I'm like, shut up.
But yeah, no, he just goes on this long diatribe, basically like pretty firmly affixing absolutely everything in reality in the universe to God, down to and including like the fact that he can recognize that his fingernails need trimming.
I heard that. Yeah,
his example. I'm like, okay.
I mean, I think that he says, and it was funny because Trick actually gave the answer that I never actually got to because I never kind of let Darth get me to that point where he's like asking me what is my basis of knowing things. But Trick did give the answer saying that he knows things since he knows who he is. He knows that he is I. And I agree. I come from like an existentialist point of view. And to me, like you can't, the primary thing that you in that case, you find yourself that there's some point in your life where you find yourself in the world. You suddenly find yourself there. There's a point where like you sort of hit the level of consciousness that you need to actually find yourself in the world. And I think that's like really basically all knowledge, all beliefs, all ideas extend from that. Because if you don't exist, you can't hold any beliefs, you can't hold any knowledge, you can't hold any ideas in your mind, because you don't exist. So to me, like I'm like, the first thing that I know is that I exist. So Darth's whole stick that like you can only know things in virtue of God fails to me, because I know the first thing I ever know is that I exist, and this is something that I know without the need for the concept of God. Therefore, I know at least one thing that doesn't require the Christian God, which to me, destroys his entire apologetic. I don't understand how God could be primary to your own existence. I might not be like ultimate or any of those things, but it doesn't matter. If I know one thing without the need for God to disseminate that information to me, then I know one thing without God, which would eliminate his position. But
yeah. I think it's kind of, I'm going to eventually break it down later, but when you what he was doing on the video before, but what was the last time that you had a chat with him?
Well, it was probably about, not last week but the week before now, but I was just listening. He was like on the politics and religion server on Discord, and I was actually like hiking at that time, and I was like, let me just listen and see what craziness he's saying now. So I jumped on, and he was like arguing with somebody about like the speed of light and all that. The universe isn't necessarily that old, because you don't know what the speed of light was in the past, like some bullshit like that. So I just waited, and I got in there, and I asked him, because I was really careful about how I answered the question, because I often hear him say, like, somebody asks him, "What's your evidence that God exists?" And he'll like quickly say one line and then move on. He'll say, "Yeah, everything is evidence for God." And so I'm like, how? Okay. So he'll say that, but then he won't allow you to go on past that point. So what I did is I asked him, because there's a verse in, I don't remember the exact verse, but it's in Romans, and it's it says basically that the world, within the world that you view around you, there's the unseen attributes of God, and man has no excuse not to believe in God. And so I asked him about that passage, and I said, would you agree that basically that passage is saying that even if you have never been exposed to Christianity, you've never read the Bible, you don't know about Jesus, that God is basically saying there that you still would come to the conclusion that God exists and created everything, because the evidence is just all around you in the world, everything you see? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. So I said, when we talk about evidence, I think of evidence as something that has a causal link or a causal chain that will lead you towards some conclusion or something or some basically just some cause, like down the line. So that in the case of, like, if we're at a murder scene, you find evidence, you're going to say that evidence causally linked to whatever actions that will lead to the person who committed the murder. And I said, would you agree with that? And he said, yes. And I was like, okay. So finally, I was actually controlling most of the conversation for pretty much the entire beginning of it, which is pretty rare if you know Darth.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. So if that's the case, when you say that everything is evidence for God, that you're saying everything in existence, and including any single aspect of existence, has a causal relation or a causal chain that ultimately leads to your God. Would you agree with that? He said yes. And I said, okay. So when you say everything is evidence for God, and you said everything has a causal link that ultimately ends with God for anything in existence, can you diagram that out for me? And I told him, like, let's just use an apple. Can you show how, through the powers of observation or whatever you have at your tools that you have at hand, but just by examining that apple, that will take you to the conclusion that God was the ultimate reason for why that apple is there. So of course, then he went on to his whole he gave me his whole lecture on like the presuppositional position that he has. Like, no, well, it's really that God is what sustained. You couldn't have any evidence, you couldn't have any claims, you couldn't have any facts, you couldn't have any knowledge unless God was the sustainer of that thing. And I said, okay, well, that's begging the question. And he's like, "It's not begging the question." I'm like, it's the definition of begging the question, because you're saying to me that situation is like you going to a murder scene and deciding, okay, Bob is the murderer in this, and the only way all this evidence works to show that there's a murder is because Bob is the murderer. You're assuming your conclusion in your first premise. And he's like, well, he's like, okay, well, let me try to explain it a different way. Then he went to the whole things like facts required. So if there's any fact in existence that doesn't refer to God, then it's not a fact. And I said, well, I don't really think that I guess you could equate facts and evidence to being similar, but I don't think that actually addresses what I'm saying, and it would still be begging the question. So of course he's trying to redirect, and he's trying, because that's his thing. He doesn't want to play defense for his position. He wants to question you and grill you on things. He does not like to have to answer questions himself.
Yeah, he's gonna answer me these questions 3.
yeah, and it's so like, and I was trying to, and he was asking me, what do you think? And I'm like, what do you think about it? Well, under your worldview, could you something? I haven't given you my worldview. I haven't made any references to what I believe. I'm not like making any claims about anything from my position. I specifically asked you questions about your position on things because I wanted to see, this is a question about your beliefs, about the claims you make. And so he surprisingly, he was like, he's like, okay, he went back onto the question. And eventually I just got him to the point where I kept repeating to him, like, no, you can't use that God is, you need God for these facts. The only reason there is evidence is because that's begging the question. Like, maybe perhaps that answers part of the situation, but you have already agreed that any piece of evidence in existence is going to have an ultimate causal chain that leads ultimately to God. You agreed to that. And he said yes. So, and of course he tried to say, well, when I said he was begging the question, I missed this sort of, but he did accuse, he's like, well, wouldn't you say that your worldview also begs the question because you're starting from a not God position? I was like, first of all, I didn't give you my worldview at all. But second of all, I didn't point this out. I missed it. As I did say, I'm like, if we were talking about my worldview, maybe you could make a case that there was some question begging going on, but that's not the issue right now. But what I should point out to him was that I kicked myself was that was the tu quo que fallacy, because he was basically saying, you do this too,
right.
Which I find funny because there are so many videos that I've seen, like more stuff in his past, not like recently, where people will point out to him that, because he'll say that you have no grounding for the presuppositions in your worldview, and people will say to him, well, that's what a presupposition it is. It's like, it's not something that you claim that you can ground. It's a starting point. And so therefore, like, you don't have grounding for your presuppositions, and he'll automatically be like, oh, that's a tu quo fallacy. So it kind of annoyed me that I didn't point out that to him, because that would have really killed him, and that would have been like, that's tu quo fallacy. But
I think he did that to Floyd FP.
He did that a few times to Floyd. I've seen him do it to, like, one time I saw a video with him, like an older one with him in, like, Destiny, I think his name is, and okay. He did that to Destiny and a few other people. But yeah, but I missed that. I wish somebody pointed it out to me in chat. I hadn't looked at the chat, like, because I guess I was walking, so I wasn't concentrating on the chat as well. But I was like, damn it, I wish I had caught him for that tu quo que thing. But anyway, so eventually I got to the point where, like, he's like, well, I said, well, since you've already agreed that on these, that yes, this means what I laid out in my beginning of the line of questioning, can you show that causal chain that ultimately leads to God? And he's like, well, it's temporal. So, like, are you talking about, like, in a temporal way? And I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess that any causal link is, because, like, causality is going to involve temporal aspects. It is temporal. That's the nature of it. So yeah, sure, it's temporal. Well, I don't know, because you're asking me to break it down from, like, when from, like, it's mostly as an apple, break it down to its particular matter parts, and then show how God was the origin of these parts. And I said, yeah. So, well, I can't do that. And I was surprised. I was like, whoa, because I did not expect him to actually admit that he couldn't do that. I'm like, it's like, wow, I did not expect him to say that, because really, if he's saying that's the case, he can't make the claim to everybody that just by the world around you, that you can tie that to God without some giant leap in your logic there. Like it may be it may be the case that it is causally linked to God in some way, and and it may be the case that you can't show it, but for him to agree to those conditions and then say that he can't show it, to me sort of like, well, why are you bugging people, or why would you expect, why, like when in the passage in the Bible, when it says man has no excuse for not believing in God because he should see the connections in the real world around him, in the unseen aspects of the world, whatever that means, that would lead him to believe that a God must be responsible. So, and that man would have no excuse. Well, to me, that means if I can't see that these things somehow have to come from God, then I do have an excuse to not believe in God, right? And of course, he's like, well, no. I asked him, like, well, if you can't, what's the reason you can't show these connections? He said, well, it's because it happened in the past, and the past doesn't exist. And I was like,
What?
I was like, I don't know what that means to say that the past doesn't. I didn't get to press him on that. I was like, the past doesn't exist. I'm thinking in my head, like, of all times, like, if like generally you could say the only, I guess, time that matters is the present, and you might be able to like make an argument that the future doesn't exist because we haven't been there yet. But the past, to me, the past like exists because we've been there. It's something that happened. Like whether or not it exists in the sense that like we can go visit it is one thing, but I mean, like if you don't accept that the past happened or the past is a thing, could you make any? Could we learn anything? Could we make any predications? Could we know our own names if we didn't accept that the past was something that's true, or that's something that like we can glean information from? We couldn't do it. Like imagine the court cases. Like you couldn't hold court case. Like a lawyer would just have to go up to the stand and be like to the jury, "Hey, everybody. Well, the past doesn't exist. So like this guy didn't murder." So
yeah. We can't hold anyone accountable for past actions. They don't. They're not real anymore. This actually, though, this makes me wonder. There's something that he says repeatedly to people because he's he usually emphasizes it when he's trying to get somebody right in the beginning of his routine.
Yeah.
And it's not just that God is the creator of the universe, but he's the active sustainer of the universe, right? And I caught him doing this again. Every once in a while, a conversation will go in a way where he doesn't bring this up.
Yeah.
But he did today on the one with Trick and Tasteless Opinion. He says something to the effect like, it was really quick, but it was like everything that happens would just basically be a random chance occurrence with no regularity from moment to moment. Like
I don't know what that means.
Like every single thing without God is luck. And I'm like, what level of skepticism do you harbor that you think that God is literally holding reality together? So, but then he goes on to this definition about his mind. So if, that it's, all of this stuff is based on the revealed plan in God's mind. I'm like, okay, if he believes the past doesn't exist, is he saying God has no memory?
Yeah, that's a good question. I never, because I like as soon as he said that, like first I was just thrown off for a loop when he actually said that he couldn't show the causal connection that ultimately led to God. So I was like, wow, I did not expect him to give me that answer. I was prepared more for him to like fight and say he could show that. So like I was like sort of caught up. So like I didn't know. I was like, wow, he just basically admitted the entire destruction of his entire like the adhesive glue is worldview, because he says that everything must be. You're right. He says everything must be sustained. Like so, I take that as like every interaction in the universe, like every single event that happens in the universe, from the most micro to the most macro, it needs the constant attention of God to facilitate it. Right. That's what I get from that when he says that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, tentatively, I think where he ends up what he ends up doing is like the world will literally evaporate without God, right? Like
Right, right.
I mean, and this is the weird thing, because he'll try to like say things like, um he'll try to appeal to like, the opposite could of being the case or something like this, and it's like, what could be the opposite of all of reality? There's nothing else to appeal to. And if I'm an individual that doesn't believe in God, and God sustaining every active thing, including my recognition that my fingernails could use trimming,
Yeah.
isn't my disbelief part of his plan?
Yeah. That's
Like,
another problem.
I mean, now all of this stuff entails his plan, and none of it. I'm talking with another guy who goes by the name Criminalize Abortion Now.
Yeah, you were
Charm.
talking to him on my server actually. I saw
Yeah,
the
yeah.
exchange you had.
Um. So yeah, he kind of does the same thing too. He's like, no, God can't be resisted. I'm like, well, if he can't be resisted, then what? How are we condemned by him? Well, because of sin. Like, well, that sounds like resistance. No.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
okay, I know that we can't injure him, right? But he sure is touchy. The way God is depicted, he's a quite touchy personality.
yeah. No,
But
Darth
yeah,
will always ask you to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I'm like Darth will always ask you to like to ground like how you reason and everything, like, or like, what grounds do you have for your reason, which I kind of find strange. Is like I'll ask him like, well, why are we arguing whether or not I can ground reason? Because like you're according to his worldview, God gave us all the ability to reason. Like you don't even if you think that I'm trying to ground it incorrectly, you do believe that I can read and everyone can reason. He believes everybody was given the ability to reason by God. It's not like people who don't believe in God takes their ability to reason away from them. He still believes that God gives them that ability, that everyone can reason because God created an orderly universe, and therefore, we can reason within it. So I always ask him like, well, so God gave me. You're like trying to like. I don't know why you're asking me to ground reason because you already believe I have it, but God gave me reason just and so that I could deny Him. Like it seems like a dumb plan. Like why would he do that? Like why would? And what I mean, generally, I think his answer to that is always going to be, well, like because you're in a form of rebellion, so that's just so this is why you don't realize that that you can only reason with God, and so you're just rebelling against Him. Which and because he thinks that we all do believe in God, we're just lying.
But that's where he's a victim of the two, of the psychological position of presuppositional apologetics. Like he can just kind of feed himself into this. So that, I mean, it's a weird apologetic because it allows somebody like this guy to be as moral, be a sanctimonious, moralizing prig.
Yeah.
Everywhere he goes, but then at the same time, it's like he's actually gotten kind of mentally captured by this idea where it's like if he's having it to the point where he even uses some of that assumption on other believers, where it's like I'm talking to somebody who's an atheist or a skeptic. The first assumption of presuppositional apologetics is to assume that they already know that there's a God.
Yeah.
They're either lying to you or they're bamboozled, and it's up to you to either one, decide which you prefer, or determine which is the case. And it's like, wait a minute, all you end up getting are guys like Darth who decide, you know what, I don't think that you've been tricked by something. I think you're trying to trick me.
That's the
You're
thing that
lying to me.
annoys me. It's like,
Yeah.
well, he's assuming that you're being like automatically, if you're an atheist or an agnostic or whatever, he's assuming that you are lying to him about what you believe.
Yeah.
Which is extremely disingenuous, which kills me because when he goes on, he says that so that's his whole thing. You can't argue against a person who, no matter what you're going to say to them, no matter how honest that or you feel you're being even, as far as trying to relay your position, he's coming from just into the conversation even before you've entered into it. You are lying automatically. God exists. You're rebelling. You're lying.
Right.
So like when that poisons the whole. I mean, it is poison. It's one form of poisoning the well. You're poisoning the entire interaction because you're assuming right off the bat that they're a liar and that they're not relaying like a sincere account of what they believe. Which to me is like, how do you have any conversation when you do that? How do you? It's almost like we shouldn't engage with him because it's like anybody who comes to the table with that position, what are you going to do? There's nothing you're going to do to affect that person.
What's interesting about it is the approach they take, because it informs how they end up using it. You almost rarely see someone, like, if they assumed that everyone's deceitful, they're gonna get crazy, right? But if they assume that we are suppressing the truth and our unrighteousness, not as a conscious act, but because sin nature has got a hold on us, and without the regenerative power of the Holy Spirit to change our hearts, there's no other way. We're always going to be skeptical, and we're always going to defer to these bad inclinations or whatever. If you assume it from that perspective, the only thing you do with the presuppositional apologetic is present somebody with the information, listen to their objections, and like, well, that's what I think, that's my worldview, and we'll just leave it at that. And I'll pray for you, and then take their leave. I don't see many presuppers doing that. The people that end up getting attracted to the argument is like, your opponent is wrong from the jump, and some zit-faced lunatic is like, it just it messes their pants and is like, I got him, I can own everybody by default, and
it's
then
a debate tactic.
Yeah,
it's not really like an honest exchange in any way.
Yeah, and I think that's why, again, like, somebody like Darth, who is old enough to be our father, he's always talking about teenagers and stuff. You were attracted to this apologetic from the instincts of a teenager. It gave you the ability to think that you could do maximum poundage with little effort.
Well, if you ever listen, it's interesting, because like, if you because he's a big fan of Greg Bonson. And so like that, his entire project is almost like word for word, like Bonson's like what does he call those? His sloganisms. I always find it funny when he says atheists have sloganisms. I want to be like, dude, you have all the Bonson sloganisms. But
he's memorized them almost verbatim. That's hilarious.
Exactly. But Bonson even says, like, in some of his, it's one of his lectures, like, he even says that like you're not going to change the unbeliever's mind. It's not your like that, because they're Calvinists, I think, for the most part. So they kind of believe like there's like this fated like people are, you're even before you're born, you're believers are chosen and non-believers are going to be, reprobates are just chosen by God. There's no changing it, unless of course you're like, the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit that needs to convince you. So Bonson says, well, like, it's not your job to bring the skeptic to the Holy Spirit. It's just your job is to shut his or her mouth. So to me, it's like, look, they realize, and I've heard this, and this is a thing I've heard also with, like, from Darth. I've heard it from Saitan Brunegade is another one, or Bruggenkate, I think is how you actually say his name. But they'll say, like, they were frustrated with, like, the evidential apologetics, because Sai says that, this is like a quote from Sai, he says, like, he would give these arguments, the evidential arguments, to atheists and unbelievers, and they would throw them back in his face, because they would get, like, logically destroyed, because they, most of the evidential arguments are old, and we've long dealt with. There really aren't any new evidential arguments for God that we've long dealt with, and they're pretty much always, there's always some problem in logic within them. They just don't line up with reality. So that's, like, became frustrating to them. See, like Darth even said, you would say, well, you would make some kind of predilection or make some claim about God, and then he says, well, how do you know that? And how do you know that? He's like, it's mad, and it made me nuts. It's annoying. So, like, they discover the presuppositional apologetic, which allows them to, like, skirt all of that shit. They don't have to address any of that, because all they're going to address is they're going to shut down the conversation completely by denying you the ability to even take part in the conversation. They're saying you don't even have the grounds to make any of these assertions. You don't have any grounds to claim for evidence, to claim for truth, to claim for facts, to claim, about reality. So therefore, you can't even be engaged in this conversation. And what it is, it's only so that they can ignore all the problem, like, they don't want to hear all the arguments that they get, like the evidential arguments against them that are, any logical person would go, oh yeah, they're pretty sound arguments against these evidential claims. So you get to just ignore that, and you'll see Darth do this, in like one of his, somebody he really hates is what's her name, Shannon Q. Like, in that debate he had with her, she was saying that her problem with the Christian worldview is that she couldn't reconcile the idea of the soul. And
Right.
he was trying to get off that as quickly as possible because it doesn't make sense. And so like if he has to sit there and try to make some kind of sense out of like some of the actual like beliefs that are that are entailed in Christianity. Like if you are a Christian, you have to like believe these things that don't make any sense. He doesn't want for anyone to get on those because they cause anxiety. I think that really is. It's a way for them to get rid of this anxiety they have about their beliefs. That they go, oh my God, maybe this isn't true, and they don't like that. It's uncomfortable for them.
Yeah, well, and now it's interesting to see. Like, I don't know if you've watched some of my conversations. I don't know, a month ago with Otangelo, but I think. Okay, I think I tell him this. I think I gave him this warning, if not in person, then at least in a video where you could hear it. And it was like, look, you need to be careful with this because if you're going to talk to him about this, it seems to me like you're like, because he had told me, he's like, no, I still like a lot of evidence. I still like evidentialism and I like evidentialist arguments, but I wanted to learn this precept apologetic because I'm interested in that as well. And I'm like, okay, well, if you try to use both of them, eventually that's going to bite you in the ass because if Darth catches you doing that, he's going to accuse you of like worldly thinking or something like that. And he was like, no, and then he did. There's the Kalam argument, I guess, that they had. He ends up like, I
saw that.
Darth ends up, muting him. Like, what the hell? And I was like, man,
you're going against God, Otangelo. You're going against God with this.
Yeah, you're trying to. That's worldly thinking. You're trying to use evidence in your own senses to justify it. It's automatically. It's like, well, so it's automatically justified because it's God's plan. Great. Yeah. My disbelief is God's plan. Justified. Atheism is real.
I don't even know how. Like when he says like you're using your. I don't know. I'm like, how else would I? Like, what do you mean you're using your own human reason? What else would I use? Like, how can I possibly use something else? Like, say, like, no, I don't have, God is in my mind. So, like, for you to say, like, I need to, like, well, you can't use your reasoning. What other reasoning? Like, did you not use your reasoning when you came to accept these things? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. Yeah. And the idea that like, it's like, look, if I show up and the first thing you ask me, how come no God, or however awkwardly worded he uses it, like as soon as you ask me that question, you assumed I have reason.
Yeah. What does he do? And he'll say like, what is he? He'll be like, well, how is it that that God doesn't, or how is it that God doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And like most people are going to be like, well, I don't know.
I always go with the definition that's usually accepted. I'm like, well, because a disembodied mind, I don't understand what's a disembodied mind being instantiated by. Yep. Minds are instantiated by something. You've got a disembodied one that's instantiated by itself. And the only reason that you need it is because you need something to have willpower. It needs to be able to make decisions, which doesn't make sense if it knows everything. Because a being like that, that's not bound by space and time, is eternal in that sense, has always been, always will be, and is the creator of absolutely everything, knows how everything's going to work, so it doesn't make choices.
No, that's what the first encounter I had with him, that was the thing that I went to first. I was like, when he said that, he told me like, God is a disembodied mind. I was like, whoa. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, well, that to me that like God violates the existential principle of existence precedes essence, because like what I like gather about like how minds developed is like, I think I had like one of the earliest discussions I had on my Discord channel was like we talked about how like if a mind, let's say you had an intact like human mind, and this mind was somehow being sustained, but it didn't have any senses, so it had no eyes to give it information, hearing, smelling. It had none of those things. Could it have formulate any thoughts? And in my opinion about that, it would be no, because the way it seems to me minds and like sort of developed as senses became more like acute. So like you had like, early like a nervous system had to develop to accommodate the senses, and eventually like what happened was that your senses became integrated enough that like that a mind was needed to a mind would be needed to integrate all the information to give you like some form of perception. So the idea that like you could have any like a mind that existed with nothing around it that it could perceive, like it's like, because if God is a disembodied mind, there's nothing before him. He's a mind that floats or not even disposable, just like is in nothing, with nothing, no environment, nothing around him. He is a being for himself, which is like strange to me, because how would he have thoughts? How could anything come to his head? How would it's like and thoughts are sequential events. Like they're triggered by some experience that you have in the world, like through your senses. Like, oh, you're walking down the street and you see this happen, and that's, you have thoughts about it. Somebody tells you some information, and you formulate a perception. You have thoughts about that. I don't see how, like, outside of time and outside of like an environment around you, a mind could do anything. It seemed to me that and also like existing outside of space and time, that doesn't seem to make any logical sense to me. How does something exist like separate or outside of space and time? It would only abstract things to me can exist. Like abstract objects may be eternal, but because they don't have any like consciousness, they're just like a thing. They're just a concept, and maybe you don't need minds to need minds to be aware of that, but you don't necessarily need a mind for the proposition to be true. But like in the case of like a God, like how how would, which they want to say is objective. Like they're going to say, like, even though God doesn't have a body or anything like that, he's still an objective being. So like, how does an objective being have any thoughts or sequential capabilities or potentialities if it doesn't exist in time? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's sort of like the notion that I tend to struggle with is that the idea of like, well, God, what if you really if you let your imagination extend out to the implications of what this is supposed to be, an eternal, non-spatial, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, disembodied mind that is the source of absolutely all reality. When you talk about it making choices, that doesn't follow, because we make choices based on limited information.
Right.
We have to look at things and evaluate them, and then we make a decision. Automatically, this ultimate being is of a standard that doesn't relate. So it's like, it doesn't make choices, it wills things into existence exactly the way it intended. So notions like God being able to change his mind, and you have stories of that. I bring this up all the time.
Yeah.
If you believe that the Bible, if you believe that definition of God, and then you also believe that the Bible is special revelation, and you see stories in which God's mind is being changed in conversations with Moses or others, then there's a problem there. That's inconsistent with what his properties entail.
Yeah,
So
it's like, did he always know he was like, so did he always know he was going to change his mind? Because if he did, why would he bring up the first, or like why would he have to take the first position to begin with if like he just knew he was going to change his mind afterwards?
And then not only that, but you end up the apologist ends up having to kind of cheapen the story, because they'll just say, oh, well, it's not like that, per se. God knew what he was going to do. So then you're like left with the conclusion, oh, so it was a pantomime for Moses' sake? Like he's just condescending?
Yeah, like is he like just trying to operate like on the level of like a person just to fuck with him? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah. So, I mean, things like that have always bugged me. And then, the notion that, like, one of the things he tried to trap that trick kid in Tom's previous video was, he's like, oh, what made you think that this particular being has to have all three great making properties? It's like, you could pick any of the two and find ways in which they contradict. Like, if you have omniscience and omnipotence, right, this being is capable of creating beings with free will.
Yeah.
And that free will ends up basically changing his plans.
Yep.
We can do things against what he wanted, and even plans isn't an intuitive thing anymore, right? How does God doesn't plan things in that sense. Like, we plan, thinking like, this is what I'm going to do, and hopefully the plan comes together and it works, right? God's supposed to already know the conclusion of it, and yet he created beings with free will that were supposedly not robots. We're not locked in a maze. So it's like, you have a basic contradiction there that you can't unravel, just between omnipotence and omniscience. And I've seen people, like, I think Turek like ties himself in knots trying to explain that one away, and it's just like, dude, stop doing this. They'll try to say like, oh, well, what you're trying to do is say that God can do absolutely everything. We're not saying that God can do absolutely everything. I'm like, I'm not either. I'm saying he knows everything, and yet he creates beings with free will that seemingly that has an implication that we can do something that takes God by surprise.
It's like what George Carlin say about these. He's like, well, every 2-bit preacher can come along and fuck up your plan. What's the point of being God?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of base, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, Darth spends his time now in rooms he controls, barking at people, and it's like he's never going to get any better about this because it's like he's never in a like, and it's odd because he doesn't ever get into just casual conversations for the most part. He treats everything like a blood sport.
Yeah, it's like it's got to be ponage going on. He's a gladiator for God.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys are so stupid and deceitful and these disgusting liars. And I'm like, look, like if that's what you think, you need to turn off your computer. You need to knock it. Like if you think you are in the toxic hellhole of the social media experience that you're even briefly describing to us, and he seems to mention it every time there's a video of him, like, then you need to pull the plug and take up woodcrafting or woodworking or bird watching or something. Do something old people do. Play shuttlecock.
Yeah, so I don't think he's a very authentic person because of that. I think so I always think why, if he's so miserable, is he? I mean, he's always he loses his temper pretty much every 5 minutes. It's like something isn't there's some kind of imbalance going. There's something going on. It's funny. It's like people were like, Darth, you need therapy, and I think it's true. I think there's something's going wrong with him because it's not healthy for someone to be that angry and all the time and to think everybody is out trying to lie to you and being deceptive, and it's I mean, I think I'm not a psychologist, and my sister is actually a psychologist, but he does he has a lot of he ticks a lot of the boxes for narcissism.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, so he's incapable of realizing. That's what I think. He's incapable of self-reflection on a level that he could realize. Because most people would be like, "Oh shit," we're we at some point we realize, "Oh my god, I'm an asshole. I need to do something to change. There's something I gotta do to change this. Because all my interactions are just insanity." But he doesn't have that self-awareness. He'll even point out, if you point out, people say dude, you're really, he's like, no, I'm not, I'm confrontational. I'll agree to that. I'm that's his level of self-awareness. He's like, yeah, no, I know you're not confrontational. You're downright abrasive, belligerent, and toxic.
He's like, dude, you're being openly hostile. When one guy calls him out at the end of the latest video, tasteless opinion. He's like, look, you put this guy, you're having a conversation, your interlocutor, you don't like what he says, so you put him on mute, and then you talk shit about him, and he can't defend himself. That's what a coward does, and it was weird. He calls him out, and then all of a sudden
you're kicked.
But did you notice that Darth's tone got really super patronizing? He was he was almost like he was exaggerated calmness at that point. You need to listen to me. You need to calm. He's trying to this way. When people look at him, it's no, tasteless opinion is flying off the handle and calling Darth a meanie.
Right.
No, I'm being perfectly calm. We just listened to you spend the better part of 6 minutes verbally trashing someone who has no ability to say anything back.
Yeah, that's another narcissist manipulating tactic. You make it seem like everybody else is the problem, and you're the white knight in shining armor, and everyone's attacking you basically, and so you're the victim. But you're the great, because I think that because he overinflates his success at debating. He overinflates his intelligence level. This is why he always has to bring up things well, how old are there's all these tactics he uses to try to is if someone is saying something he knows he's not going to really be able to get around, he will he'll go back to those tried and true methods of his that were oh, how old are you? You're this age. Well, it's a distracting tactic, and he'll get on people because he's actually he's trying to run out the clock himself. And it's funny because he'll say to people oh, see, they're only bringing this to run out the clock. And I'm like, dude, the only person that's always constantly deflecting away from the actual subject at hand is you. You're always trying to redirect to something that you can handle. He banned last night. I talked to him for a few minutes because he was going on about something about evolution is strong is only the strongest animals survive, And I'm like, well, that's not really like he's like saying physical strength or physical fitness, and I'm like, well, that's not really what evolution does. It's really just more of like whatever's good enough to get you to survive. So like, it's not really like this. It doesn't necessarily mean the strongest animal is going to survive and pass on its genes and become a dominant animal or have success. Like there are plenty of animals out there that have plenty of flaws that still make it into the still make have the larger population because from that trait wasn't enough to stop them from like reproducing.
Right.
My example was like like there's some goats who have like a a neurological problem where if you scare them, their muscles all go into a lock and they faint. Fainting goats, and like that's very detrimental. But because like human beings have domesticated goats and protected them, that the fact that trait got passed on and it didn't kill off in goat population. So you have this trait that like even though it's not is definitely a detrimental trait, it's still the goats are still around. So it didn't matter to evolution that they weren't the strongest in that case. Or like you could say that with like cats who have some of the cats only have they lack the ability to taste anything but bitter, and that's a trait that like it's a mutation that like got passed on because it didn't end up really affecting their ability to survive. Like human beings have tons of them. We have tons of problems with like our hips and our backs because we're not fully evolved into that. But we our technology and everything sort of made it so that we really didn't have to fix those things. So,
we built footwear and easy chairs.
Yeah. So he's like mad because because he realized, well, yeah, what he said was a mistake. So he's like, well, did you know that Darwin was a racist? He said unfavored racist. He thought that like Aborigines and everything were a lower class. I'm like, I don't think that's actually what he thought, but which it's still irrelevant to the case. So you're saying just because Darwin was a racist, that means evolution isn't true, and so that he didn't like that, and then so then he went to this. He's like, well, do you even know like what what they say the greatest evidence for universal common ancestry is? And I'm thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, this is completely another like topic of like evolution. We weren't talking about that at all. So I'm like, well, I was like, oh, I was just assuming that it's genetics. You can easily, like follow the genetic markers and everything to show because all animals have, because we all have the same genesis, you're gonna have the similar. There's most of your genetic code is you're gonna share with animals you have the previous ancestors with, right?
I think they usually get a little weird about that,
Yeah, but like I was like, I don't know if that's what I assumed would be the best was like the best argument for universal common ancestry, and he's like, no, that's not it. You don't even know that. And he's like yelling at me about it. I'm like, all right, well, I'm like, that's what I thought. So he's like asking me the questions again, and I'm like, well, since you didn't like the answer that it was genetics, I'm gonna say I don't know, because you didn't like that answer. He's like, see, yeah, you're coming on here, you don't even know what you're talking about, and you're yelling at me for not knowing evolution, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, first of all, what I yelled at you for evolution, then he went to the whole, how old are you thinking? I'm like, Darth, we've talked before. I'm not going to answer this question. It's retarded. There's no point in it's just, you're just as one of your distracting techniques. And he's like, you know what, that's it. And then he's like, yeah, you're muted. And then he muted me and he put me on his like troll list on the thing now. So now I'm officially on his troll list. So
nice.
I can't even talk to him again.
I wonder if I'm on that list. I'll have to ask Otangelo sometime. Like, Otangelo, can you ask him? Like,
I'll have to look. He has a bot on there. It's called like Watchdog. And if your name is on the Watchdog bot, then you're on his troll list.
Is that on politics and religion?
Yes.
So is he just given up on
Reformation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen him on there in a while. It's mostly Tom Locke who's been on there running it. He had like a stage, like what they do is like a stage event like on that channel the other day that I talked to him on. But it's actually kind of similar to a YouTube stream like this. I don't know why they have that, because to me it's not really that different than just regular BC chat. But So I joined it. I was like, he was talking about, like, he's like, because he like tries to pull pages from Darth's book. Like Tone like doesn't even know like presupposition because he studied it really himself. He mostly learned his stuff from Darth. I actually think Tone like is like the dumbest of all the Darth Doc and Psycho fans, because it's clear to me he doesn't grasp some of the concepts he espouses. But he was going on about like how it's like, can't honestly some atheists come on here, they can substantiate atheism. And to me, I identify as like an agnostic atheist. So like generally, if I like pick a role or anything, I'll pick agnostic, because I think that's like is like, I can cover both grounds in that. Because as an agnostic, if I don't know that God exists, well, I also don't believe that any gods exist, in my opinion. So I'd still be an agnostic atheist. But so he's like, well, of course, I have that role on that channel, like as agnostic. So he's becoming. He's like, you're not even atheist. You're not. Why are you coming on here? And I'm like, well, that's besides the point. But what the issue is that I don't understand what it means to substantiate atheism. It seems to me like a reversal of the burden of proof, which is you're asking someone to prove a negative fallacy. And he's like, well, you can prove negatives. I'm like, not a negative like that. You can't like prove a universal negative in that way. Like like even Darth and his minions, like including Tom, like will call atheism like a universal negative. And I'm like, how would you prove a universal negative is true? To me, that seems like something that's impossible. It's not like you can like present evidence of something that doesn't exist. It's like I can't like give you evidence that the Loch Ness monster. Like, what would that be? What evidence would there be that the Loch Ness monster doesn't exist? What evidence would there be that God doesn't exist? I can't show you evidence of that. We just have to like deal with the arguments and like show that your evidence is lacking. I don't understand how. So I brought this to him, and he's like, no, you're an idiot. You don't understand that. He's like, if you can't substantiate atheism, then it's not true. And I'm like, well, perhaps, but if you can't substantiate Christianity, it also wouldn't be true, right? I can substantiate Christianity. And so I was like, all right, so from your opinion, I ran this argument with Tom, and I still haven't got to do it with Darth, and I probably never will. And I said, like, Tom, like, can you hold? I asked, because he was trying to drill me on certain things, and I just kept ignoring him and going back. I said, Tom, like, can you hold? I told him, like, Tom, I'm an existentialist. I hold to the idea that being in the world is the primary mode of anything. It like your experience, like nothing defines you until you start experiencing things. So I can't know things. I can't have beliefs. I can't do anything. I couldn't even be involved in this conversation if I don't exist. So the first thing that I know is that I exist because I experience it. And therefore, so that's the whole argument. Therefore, I know one thing that doesn't require God for me to know. Therefore, I don't need God to know things. And he's like, well, like, you have to, you don't get the argument. You wouldn't even be able to know that you exist if you didn't have God to give you that grounding. And I was like, well, I didn't know. I had no concept or idea or opinion about God once I realized that I exist. There wasn't like the first time that I experienced my being in the world, where my consciousness came to a level where I could understand that I exist. There was no concept of God. I was never presented God. I never read anything about it. I was too young to have any of those ideas that I can know.
Well, when you're brand new and just negotiating the world, you're in the world, manipulating things and discovering things, and you have no idea you don't have a concept for those things.
Remember, like certain events, like it doesn't matter. I still was experiencing things, and if I couldn't consciously remember those things, or didn't have the cognitive capacity to understand anything of complexity, I still was experiencing things. I was still a fact in my reality that my because I could even apply this. Like I have cats. I always try to like say I can apply this to other sentient creatures. Like I try to make the distinction between like sentient. I pretty much think that all animals that are conscious, that experience things, are sentient. And then like if you have the extra level of consciousness where you're conscious of being conscious, I call that like sapiens. So I try to distinguish between those two. But so like my cats are sentient. They experience things. They might not understand their existence, like as in like they have a sense of self. They still have an experience of the world. They still can respond to stimuli. So they know, and they could know things, like whether or not they know they exist wouldn't matter, because they can know things. They can't formulate any idea of a god. They don't have the capacity to do that. So to me, the self is primary to any of those things. So I asked him, like, well, Toma, can like, would you even be able to engage in this conversation, talk about ideas, believe in anything, and have any knowledge if you didn't first acknowledge your own existence, or if you didn't first at least have some experience? And he would not. And he's like, no, that's not the point. And he would not answer the damn question, because he couldn't. Because if he did, he would have to admit that you can know, or you can have things, or you could know of things without the need for God.
Yeah.
I mean, it still might be the case that a God exists even in that situation, but you couldn't use the argument that they're not, like, you couldn't know anything without God, because there'd be at least one thing that I could know that didn't involve God. Like, my cats could know there's food in their bowl by going over there and seeing it. They don't need to know. They don't need God to like give them the impetus to be able to know that. They can just walk over and see it. So
that's where you're wrong, Rascal. That's where you're wrong. Those cats, that's the evidence of God for me, is every time my cat takes a poo, because God made that poo happen with his guiding hand, his energy. It was all part of the plan in his divine mind.
Yeah, like, I guess technically, in their point of view, if cats needed to like uphold every single like event that happens in the universe, he's got to be right there to like take his hands and like connect the tubes to make sure a poop happens.
Yeah, when that rapist decides to just, throw caution to the wind and go for the first degree murder too, and strangle his victim, that's also part of God's divine mind.
Yeah, he's had to, because like not only did he have to sustain that, but he had to know what was going to happen before it was going to happen.
And the only way that you can get around that, for some reason, this is the thing that bugs me about the kind of special pleading that will end up happening, is like, no. What you have to understand is that evil is a byproduct of human free will, right? Yeah. Which God gave us. God created us with free will, according to you, and byproduct of that is that we can do things that are not part of his nature, and yet he is the grounding of all reality, the source of what is possible and impossible. And one of the things that's possible in this world, thanks to him, are things like rape and murder.
Yeah, it's interesting too, that idea, like, because like they think that, like, they say like God is all powerful, right? So like he pretty much is there's nothing that he can't do, but he can't, according to Christians, he can't lie, he can't sin, that would be impossible. He can't like deny his own nature. He can't, and if you ask me, he also wouldn't have free will, because like, to me, like, God wouldn't be able to do anything that he couldn't, without being, if you're a perfect being, I don't think you'd have free will, because all the things that you do would be automatically determined. But so if he can't lie, like, he can't experience like physical any physical senses, like he couldn't possibly understand like what like sensations of like touch are. He doesn't, because he has no body, right? So like, to me, like, those are things, like they're things that I can lie. Those are things that I can do that God can't. So like, it would mean that like human beings have some sort of power that's above God.
Well, I remember somebody trying to explain it away as saying, well, no, God understands the subjective experience of all of his creatures. And I'm like, an omniscient being can understand the concept of being confused?
Yeah, how could he be exactly?
Like, I don't like, or frustrated, or exhausted, right? I mean, in the Old Testament, the way Yahweh is depicted, sure, he loses his cool all the time.
Yeah,
And usually when he does, that's when he starts getting a little genocidally, and he's like, you know what sounds like a good idea? Snuffing out all of mankind except for my favorite family over here.
Yeah.
I mean, he tried to do that with Moses. He went right back to plan Noah. He's like, remember when I drowned everybody and then went with Noah's family? Well, Moses, we were up there hammering out these 10 commandments. We get down here and they're praying to a golden calf, and your brother helped them make it. What the fuck? I'm gonna kill them all, and we're gonna start over from scratch. And Moses is like, no. We've come this far. Don't forsake your people yet. And he's like, all right, fine, fuck it. But then the rest of the old OT story is just them wandering around, forgetting that they're being led through the wilderness by the fucking divine, and they complain that they don't have meat, so he feeds them roadkill, and they get sick, and thousands die, and he gets a belly laugh. Like Moses saved your asses, but he didn't save all your asses. Know what I'm talking about? Like this is a trailer park bully with divine powers. That's like. It's just a weird creature. It'd be fun to make a film. I wish David Lynch would do it. To make a movie about that portion of the Old Testament, just them in the wilderness, and try to set that, because it would be a horror movie. It would just be the weirdest damn thing. Like, we're out of meat because we have to feed this thing smoke.
Yeah, he loves the smell of burning flesh.
That's like, it's pleasing. The smell of the flesh, it's pleasing to my nostrils. More barbecue, please. Like, we're going hungry and eating manna, which is basically bugs scraped off the ground after the morning dew, and you need all the meat because smoke is, you like the smell of cooking. Why don't you come down here and help yourself to a plate, big guy? Like, no.
Yeah, there's pagan blood sacrifice with this guy. It's like really like, I'm like, he's not so sophisticated. There's a lot of pagan elements to him, like blood sacrifice, and even human sacrifice is a big thing for him. But it's like funny too, because like even when you're talking about like starting over, like I'm like thinking like the whole event of like Noah's flood to me was just like completely unnecessary. Like, he's God. He didn't have to like, okay, well, I need to preserve like the earth, even though I want to like kill off most of the people, and I got to preserve the animals. So let me like come up with this, super elaborate plan that just makes absolutely no fucking sense and is impossible anyway. He could have just snapped his fingers and just destroyed the earth and the universe and just restarted it. I don't understand. Like why would an all powerful being that just had the power to do things by will, like, bother with such a fucking complex and retarded plan? Like you just be like, hey, no, I don't want this anymore. Snap. He'd be like he's not as powerful as like Neo in the Matrix. I'm like, dude, like at least Neo can like be like, all right, let me change the whole makeup of the world. Like, this guy can't even do that shit. He has to
and here's the thing. Like, I would compare it to, I don't know if you ever played like the Civilization games.
I have like a few of them, yeah.
Okay, so it would basically be like every Civilization game, every Civilization player has had it where they start the game off, they've picked their little civilization, they start exploring the map a little bit, and then they realize they're like, oh fuck, this is just going to end badly, and you end up doing that hard reset and starting over from scratch. At no point would somebody start out, build up a civilization, kill off 8 of their cities, abandon the last one, and whittle yourself down to a struggling family on the run and be like,
headed by an 800-year-old drunk.
Like, this will work out well. Like no, like, yeah, it's like, God, why did you do like the flood and the genocide boot when you could have just done a hard boot and started over everything from scratch? Like, he seemingly could have just like, turned it on and off again, off and on again. Like,
yeah, it's like that's what Matt Dellinger like says. It's like a spoil. It's like the Bible is the tragedy, the comedy of God's failures. Is like spoiler alert: every plan goes bad for God down the line. He just never gets it. Like, to me, like, he had to know, if he's like an omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient being, he had to know that he was gonna fuck it up himself every time. But he's just like, yeah, fuck it, we'll just go through it anyway. I'm gonna do this even though I know it's gonna fuck up in the future. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, he doesn't operate like a being. Even if he was omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, he doesn't operate that way. Not at all. Like, not once in the Bible does he operate as if he was that. So, like, what do they do to get around that? They say, well, God is maximally powerful, right? So, well, he can't do things that are illogical. So, like, he couldn't make a square a circle. And so he's maximally powerful, but like that's a retarded definition as well, because everything is, I could like my the table that I have in my room is maximally powerful. It can only do things according to its nature. Everything in existence is maximally powerful. It has no meaning to say
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, and yeah. Within context, everything is maximally powerful. Yeah, so it's like, well, yeah, okay, so well, it's maximally powerful. Okay, based on the fact that it's an ultimate being. Well,
yeah,
sure. I'm like, okay, so we we could agree then that if special revelation says things like, I mean, this is the thing that I find odd. If all these facts are dependent upon God, right? Every fact is contingent upon God, right? And you need to find me a fact, and that's how we get regularity. That's how we get normality, according to Darth.
right.
Right up until a first century carpenter from Palestine steps onto a body of water that's not frozen and walks across its surface.
Yeah,
What normality and regularity is being sustained by God's power there, right? You got a God breaking the rules, his
right.
own rules, seemingly, right? Like that the only way we can have grounding for any of this kind of stuff is because of that. Darth, I think, actually takes this to a weird extent. Like every single thing that happens from moment to moment is literally a miracle being performed by God. And the only
Yeah,
reason that we have regularity is because he's giving us regularity so that we can be comfortable. But don't count on it, right?
it's like the whole idea is like when because like he'll say that like because God does that, he has grounds for induction, and like if you don't believe in God, then there is the problem of induction. But to me, like that doesn't make any sense, because if there's, I mean, he's admitted that this God can perform miracles that he could be totally unaware of. Let like something like that, he thinks that like so he could change something about reality tomorrow, and we could be totally unaware of it. It could have been a miracle. We could be totally unaware. We just think that it's part of the natural like form of nature. So that would destroy any like inductive reasoning we could possibly have.
Right. So I guess maybe he's being consistent in his hatred for probabilistic thinking, and then he seems to despise inductive reasoning because it's like, yeah, apparently you think it's a myth. Like,
Yeah, and yeah, so like to be like exactly like because he's both. It seems to me like he's talking on both sides of the things. He's like at one moment he's trying to say he could ground induction that way, but he's also admitting that like like God could perform miracles that he wouldn't be aware of, and so then it would that like so the next so something like, and I guess in the same way he's saying basically that you could also make it that so that we would just automatically somehow think that it was always that way, whatever probabilistic event that we saw, we would, even if God changed that we would just all the next day somehow not remember that it was different before that.
I'm waiting for somebody to answer that question when he says I've heard him ask this several times. He's like, can I jump from where I'm standing now on the earth? Can I jump to the moon unaided? I'm like, well, according to your worldview, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you had faith larger than a mustard seed, you bet. So where's your faith, Darth?
Yeah, that's that whole, and it's like too. That's like see, like too. I think a lot of it is like there is like an like I see the existential dilemma in people who are presuppositionalists, especially because I think the idea is like the existential dilemma that we have is like the fear, like, oh my, the world. I mean, the world seems to be an ordered place that we can logically understand, but we ultimately don't know if there really is anything that like holds things together. If the regularity that we see is true, if there really is any kind of anything that like defines us or makes us up in the world. It's like so, and like there's things we don't. There's, I mean, what we know compared to what we don't know is the percentage is totally in favor of what we don't know about the existence in the universe and all these things. So like people don't like to not know things. It makes them uncomfortable, and like so there are these loops that we can't close, and that like some people like have extreme anxiety over that. And so like when you go, this is like it really is to me, like especially the presuppositional idea that like God closes all these loops. it's a coping mechanism to me to being like, okay, well, no, now I can understand the world is. I have some reason where I can fully understand the world. There is something that's holding all these things. There is somebody who's watching out for me, and that like giving purpose to what I do and everything like that. So like I get the it's that sort of appeal, but it really is. It's just it's an anxiety ridden mind has to find something that they can grasp onto so they can make sense of things. So that's why I find it to be inauthentic. And I've never heard anybody bring that up to Darth. And I've always wondered if anybody has, because to me it is. It seems to be a coping thing that like some people might be. I'm okay with the idea that I don't. There are a lot of things that I don't know. There are some things about like the term they would use. There's some things about my worldview that I can't bring into harmony because there are some conflicting issues because I don't know everything. I'm not claiming to know it. So there are going to be things that don't line up. I'm a human. I'm going to make mistakes. I don't have the mental capacity to. I don't think we might not be equipped. Our minds, our cognition may not be equipped to like understand some of these questions, some of these problems. They might be beyond our understanding. Like the vastness of the universe is not something we can like perceive. Like you don't really understand that.
Yeah, I think I think that's an interesting aspect of what happens when they try to get into the idea of like, because Darth does really believe this idea that we can know things because we have an omniscient being that can reveal things to us in certain ways. And it's like,
what did he say? We can't be wrong, like in a way that we can't be. He says to know things.
And that's all. Yeah, that's always problematic because even for them, some of them will be like, well, he can reveal it in a way that it can't be wrong. Because I feel certain about it. And then I've seen precepts fight each other over that. Like, no, you idiot. It's not about how you feel about it. It's not about your degree of certainty. It's that you can know it for a fact and know that it couldn't be anything otherwise because this omniscient being said so. And it's like, but you can't know what an omniscient being is. Like you can't know what they know. There's no way of verifying that. And at some point, the transmission of information, it's like, I know that my cat is a cat because God makes it so. It's like, okay, then explain the fabric of space and time to me in a unified field theory. Just come up with that right now. And they're like, I'm like, okay, then why isn't your God beaming that into your brain right now?
Yeah, it seems like you're only able to know your God is beaming into your brain the things that you can know.
Right. Yeah.
But like he's not beaming into the things that you don't. So he's not actually, because I even asked that to somebody that's like, well, if I have to, we might even talk about this earlier, but like the idea of being like, well, could God have, because they say that God hasn't revealed everything. Oh, I remember who I was talking to Ezra on my channel last night, but he's like an Orthodox Christian who also like kind of he's a presuppositional as well. But I was like, well, when you say that God revealed things to you so you can know them for sure, are there things about reality that God hasn't revealed to you? And he said yes, and I'm like, well, couldn't that mean that there could be something about reality that God hasn't revealed to you that would contradict something that He did reveal to you already? And he's like, and he didn't. He's like, well, I guess it could, yeah. I'm like, well, then you can't claim you know these. This guy could be actually, even if he's not lying to you, he could be holding back just enough information that there's something that you think is actually contradictory to how it really is.
Or it could be one of those situations like in like a ghost movie or something like that, where you have some spirit from the other side trying to communicate with a living, and they're misinterpreting the information, right? Like the signal's not strong enough, and that they'll end up going back and appealing. Well, no, that's not the problem, because if God wants to make it perfectly clearly understood to you, He will. I'm like, yeah, unless it's a concept greater than you can understand. You do have a finite mind. So are you saying that when He reveals it to you, He's physically altering your brain? Because that's like a very different claim.
Yeah, it's like one of the analogies that I've heard. Like it's basically saying, like when they say God could tell the things so that they know for sure. It's like saying, well, we're pouring clean water through a dirty filter. Like the idea is like, well, the human mind is a dirty filter because it can't. It's limited by what it can know and what we can perceive. And even if you're pouring clean water through a dirty filter, the water is going to come out dirty. So it doesn't matter if somebody's like somebody omniscient or omnipotent is revealing certain things to you. You're always filtering it through something that's doesn't have the capacity to fully grasp what it's giving you.
Yeah. Short of him making you omniscient, none of the claims that they're trying to make. But like, I understand that you're trying to say that this being is omniscient and has this special category, is in this special category. Granted, but I don't understand how it communicates to us in a way that gets us past our failings, failings that it built in. And you acknowledge those failings have to be there. We're fallen humans in a fallen state. We have epistemological limitations, and yet I, as a Christian, I can sit here and say with a straight look on my face that this being can let me know things, and I can be certain that they're true. Like, no, you still can't, because your epistemology has not fucking changed. Just because, like, if you look out at the world around you and it's like, this is revelation from God, how would it be any different if you were a brain in a vat and this is just a simulation?
Exactly.
You're being presented with the exact information that you need, but even then, it's not like God made UV lights, spectrums of light that we can't see.
Yeah.
So we have senses that can't perceive all of the natural world around us. And you want to tell me that my limited perception of this world is proof that God made it when I can't even take all of it in?
I was talking about, had a similar line of argument, like thing I was talking about last night. Really, the idea that because we perceive the world to be like, because our brain creates the three-dimensional phenomenon of perception that we have in our heads. Is not really what the world actually looks like. We don't know really if the way we perceive the world is actually how things appear, because like you said, there's wavelengths of light we can't pick up. There's frequencies of sound that we don't hear. There are levels of intensity. I think that, I don't know about the sense of touch. There are probably levels of there's the whole thing where if you take like two needles and you put them like on somebody's skin on like their arm, like see how close you can get them together before they can sense whether it's one or two spots being stimulated. So like there's all these issues with your senses, that because you can't actually perceive the world the way it is. Like even our the way that the way we experience like three dimensions around us is probably illusory. Like first of all, like you like time may be actually a dimension. Like so, if time is actually a dimension, it's just we don't have the capacity to perceive it in its actual form. I mean, like if we had a different type of perception, like time might even be something that we could like a ladder, or we could climb up to go to the future and climb down to go to the past. These things we don't have what we perceive about the world isn't really the world. So like the idea that you could really know anything for sure in the end just doesn't really make any sense to me. And not only that, but like the whole concept behind certainty, and I think Darth does avoid this. I see this more like with presuppositionals like Eric Hovind and like Seitan Brugengate, where they do the can you be certain about that? And
yeah, I remember that technique. Yeah,
and I don't see the value of it, because I could be 100% certain about something and I'm completely wrong. So there's really no value to, because it's just psychological confidence in the way I would boil down certainty. Like, well, are you psychologically confident in this idea, in this belief? And like if I say yes, I'm 100% psychologically confident in this belief, I could be completely wrong about the factual nature of that belief. So why would it matter?
Well, Ozymandias, I don't know if you remember him, but he did a good teardown of that one, because after he'd heard,
I might have heard it.
Yeah, his full YouTube name was Ozymandias Ramses III.
Yes.
And he was he was kind of on track to be a philosophy professor in Canada, but he kind of dropped out. I think he got his master's degree in it, and I think he trended more towards like the analytical side. But he used to be more active in like the debate community and stuff, like back in Google Hangouts and stuff. But
I've heard a few of his videos, I think.
Yeah, he withdrew from it. He's a really super nice guy. I've talked to him. I think I talked to him once. My brother's talked to him several times, and but he hasn't really been available for he used to kind of be like, he kind of said that, when he wasn't engaging anymore, he was kind of available in the background if you had philosophy questions and stuff like that. So, he did a thing like that. He's like, he's like, I keep hearing these guys use this, and they're kind of conflating two different things. There's certitudes, right? It's
Right.
something as a certitude, a truth, and then there's certainty, which is psychological confidence in a belief. And he's like, and the idea that whether you know it for certain or not, the way they were using that just as like a little a gambit was basically, yeah. He said it was essentially irrelevant. He's like, this is just kind of this doesn't really get you anywhere. Asking how confident are you in that? Because
Right. Yeah.
but then again, you'd have to get into the whole thing where you have like what do they call that? Doxastic voluntarism or involuntary. Like the idea that you don't choose your beliefs. Your beliefs form, and then you're convinced over time, and then you kind of you don't like decide. Yep, I believe in this, and then that.
Yeah,
and then somehow that
I
works.
don't think you think that you choose to. I don't think I choose beliefs. I think that I'm either convinced or I'm not. Like if I go to the top of like the Empire State Building, I'm not. No matter how hard I try, I'm not going to convince myself that if I jump off of it, I won't die.
Right. Yeah. I can't. I think I used it as an example once with somebody. I was like, I want you to do your best I want you to decide from this day forward to believe Santa Claus is real right now. Like, and you have to believe it balls to bones, like all the way through. And they're like, well, of course that's ridiculous. I'm like, well, exactly. So like, if you're saying that somebody like, you need to choose to believe in God or choose to believe in Jesus, I can't do that. The fact that people are condemned because they didn't make the choice, quote unquote, to believe betrays a lack of how people's brains work that kind of blows up a lot of theological claims. The idea that a God would condemn you for a process you can't undertake,
Yeah, and I brought this up to Darth actually, because he'll say to you, like, when you say, like, after you've like said, well, I don't believe him, sometimes he'll say like, well, that means that that you have decided by choice that God doesn't stand in causal relations with any of the facts you're acquainted with. And when he said that to me, I said, nah, by choice? No, I don't. Like, it's not by choice. I didn't choose that. I'm not convinced that your God exists. So I don't choose to think that like any facts don't stand in relation to God. I don't believe it. It's not a choice.
Yeah, and I didn't seek out to be unconvinced of God. It
Yeah,
just over time it happened. I was raised
exactly.
in different churches, and I was, more or less convinced that there was a God. And if someone asked me, I didn't have any problem stating that, I believed it. Yeah, sure, there's a God. And then as time went on, and I started addressing more issues, things like the problem of evil and things like that, and started to doubt. And then it's like, I remember the kind of the realization that the day that my brain kind of put it together, I was like, oh shit, I guess I just don't believe that anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of like I think I probably was like almost, not that I knew the term for it, but I think like maybe around, like when I was, by the time I was 14, I was an atheist. Like I had been brought up. I mean, my parents aren't religious really. I get like it just saying. I guess at the time, like they put me into like like we had something called CCD. So like you would go. There'd be like every 3 or 4 weeks or something, you would leave like elementary school like a little bit early, and you would go to like the Catholic school, and they would like give you a Catholic school education, whatever, for religion. But so like I got my like I took like my I was I took my I had my like communion, my what do you call it, the confession, um, and I didn't never like I was out of it by the time like my confirmation would have came around. But like yeah, like I remember like having like some, just like there was cognitive dissonance going on in my brain because I believed some things about reality, and then I had that like the like teachings, those like like Catholic school teaching, religious like background teaching things, and I'm like they didn't match up, and so like it became a bigger and bigger like argument within myself, like like things just like well, wait a minute, like how is it that like there are all these other God beliefs in the past, like, and somehow I'm like that was my first like real like distinction, like something like how do I know I have the right, like what makes it that I have the right religion and the right God, like, and all the other ones are wrong. That was the first time that I started exploring the idea. I was probably like, I don't know, 11 or 12, and like I started asking lots of questions in like my CT classes, and like it got annoying. Like then they really didn't like me because I asked all these questions. Like that was like they're like, dude, you're making other people in the class start to question this stuff too. Like I'd be like, Noah's Ark was a huge thing for me. I was like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I'm like, as I was like really into, I'm an artist, and like one of the earliest things that I used to draw were like sailing ships, like like galleons and clipper ships and all those kinds of like sloops, all those kind of like ships. So like I really got into like the even like the lore, like ship lore around that, and like I read about how like the greatest like wooden shipbuilders at like one point were in Boston, and they were the same shipbuilders who made like the USS Constitution, but the USS Constitution had integrated steel beams inside of it to support it because it could not, and some iron on its sides as well, because it was too big as a wooden vessel alone to be seaworthy. Because what happened was like if it was all wood, you would put it in the water, and the ends of it would twist in opposite directions, which would cause breaks and would cause like floods into it. So they're like, well, that doesn't work. And they discovered you can't, like there was a certain limit to how big you can make a wooden vessel that it would be seaworthy. And so they said like when they built the like USS Constitution, they call it like a super frigate because it was larger than any wooden vessel could be by itself. But they were integrating steel beams in it and supports, and also some steel on the sides, which is why they call it old iron sides. So when I read about all that stuff, and I was like, well, wait a minute, and like I know like the whole like measurement system of like the Ark and the Bible is kind of like screwy. Like, what the hell is a cubit? When it was like explained to me, I was like, well, this ship is considerably bigger than what the U.S. Constitution was, and it was also flat. Like the bottom of it was like a box. It wasn't like didn't have a bottom like a boat. Didn't have like that whole like rounded shape, and it had one window on it. And I'm thinking like, that doesn't seem like, first of all, like it wouldn't float. It would if you put it and especially since it was supposed to be like some crazy, like rainstorms going on, and just like like a natural floods and natural disaster on a level that's like it's just would destroy things. So this boat, like I'm supposed to believe, this wooden box made by like an 800-year-old man who never built boats before, and like like some of his children, like was going to go in this water, was going to support all these animals, and it wasn't going to break. And not only that, but like, how were they breathing? Like, there's one hole, like which was the entrance, and I think a small window, but they shut these when the flood started, coming. So I'm like, just how do they handle the methane? Like all of those animals, especially like any of the grazing animals, like they're going to build up methane in there from their shit, and like you're gonna die. It'll smother you. It will box out you'll use up the oxygen. You'll have methane in there, and you'll die, and you won't even know it because it's methane. Even though obviously you're gonna have the smell of all the animals in there, but like the methane itself is not it's not detectable you can't smell it. So you would just be like, you'd slowly suffocate. You could suffocate in your sleep, and you wouldn't even know it. And
the easiest explanation for this is magic.
So that's the thing, yeah. So basically, then like I was in conversation with someone recently about that. I'm like, yeah, well, any of these problems that I have, you're just going to say, well, God miraculously made these things. This is magic. And so it's like, well, if you can throw that into the mix, I can't. Then it's cheating. I can't. It's not. You can't make a serious argument. I'm just supposed to believe because he's like God has, but that also.
How dare you bring in your nautical knowledge? When we're talking about something. It's God's holy box. That's all it was. It was his magic box.
Yeah, but it goes back to the argument. Well, if you do that, it's magic. Why didn't you just snap his fingers and just restart? So like it's a double-edged sword there too.
Well, then you start getting into the implications of like the poof or drown thing that Pine Creek likes to do. Like, if it were up to you, would you drown everybody? Even they're all guilty, but which one's better? Which one's more merciful?
Yeah,
just pooping them out of existence.
Yeah, Skylar Fiction brings that up a lot.
Yeah,
like he'll ask Christians like, "Oh, guy could just have snapped his fingers and just taken the souls out of those people, and that was it." And I
always like it when Christians defend the tail, right? So it's always like, like, no, it can't be that simple. Like, for an omnipotent, omniscient God, it can't be that easy. Like, yeah. What's a challenge for this thing?
Iron chariots, apparently.
Oh yeah, right. And Romans. Yeah,
Yeah.
weak to Romans. All right, well, we probably ought to wrap this up because this has been going on for about 90 minutes. So I'm going to take this
Yeah.
offline. But if anybody's interested, like Stephanie Tretton has got like a kind of spoken word performance going on in the chat.
Oh,
I'm not
check
exactly
that
sure
out.
what's going on. It's I don't know what it is.
By the way, I love your avatar with Bricktop. That's great.
Thanks. Yeah, I got a few like scabrous individuals that I usually use as my, other than GeoSam had made a little spaceship icon for me. But yeah, if I'm doing conversations and stuff, usually like if it's during like if it's during when I'm caffeinated, it's Bricktop. When I'm enjoying whiskey, it's a swear engine from Deadwood. So yeah, it's
I've
generally
seen the Jim Swearengin one too. And be like I always think Bricktop. I always think to that species like, do you know what nemesis means?
and that's directly from that scene. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
The one screen, the shot or the part where he goes and talks to Statham's character and he offers, he's like, would you like some tea? And he's like, no thanks, I'm sweet enough. That's a corny joke, but the way Alan Ford says it is hilarious. Like it's just it's cheeky and it's dismissive and it's also kind of threatening. Like it's he's hilarious.
And it's funny because like he's such a like, even he kind of almost looks like a disarming, like kind of like nerdy British guy in some ways, but he's such a scary bastard in reality. Like he's a son of a bitch.
Yeah, he looks like the kind of guy he's like 5-6 years away from feeding ducks at the park.
Yeah.
He's just like he's feeding, telling people how to dispose of corpses to pigs.
Yeah, but he's this like ultra dangerous guy. It's great.
Well, yeah. Well, I'll take this off air. Thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks Rascal for coming on. We'll probably do this again sometime over another topic. Darth's not going anywhere anytime soon, so we'll always have that to talk about.
He provides endless entertainment.
Endless, yeah. So thanks, folks, for showing up. I'm going to take this off, and we will see you later. Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.